When most people think of a mechanical timepiece, they think of tick-tock, tick-tock, and the noise that a mechanical timepiece or a clock makes. We can only hear a tick-tock. The other noises, there's actually 5 of them taking place, and the other noises we can't hear. They're too quiet. When timing a mechanical watch, we use a special microphone that will be able to listen to the tick-tock noises that a wristwatch makes and determine the rate and the amplitude of that watch based on those sounds. The balance wheel oscillates back and forth, and on that balance wheel there is a jewel that hangs down and interacts with the tail of the pallet fork. When it knocks that pallet fork loose to allow the escape wheel to turn, you have one sound. You will also have the escape wheel impacting the pallet fork, which is a second sound. Then you will have the pallet fork hitting that roller jewel on the balance wheel to keep it going. That's your third sound. You will then have a locking sound where the escape wheel will lock up on the pallet fork jewel. That's the fourth sound. And the fifth sound is the pallet fork tail hitting solid banking or a banking pin, which is where it comes to rest until the balance wheel comes back around and knocks it again. So these 5 noises are what we can use to determine the daily rate and the amplitude, and also the beat error of a wristwatch. Using what we call a timing machine, we can listen to the heartbeat of a watch. That heartbeat actually makes 5 noises instead of what we usually think of as just tick and tock. The spacing of those 5 noises is what will determine the rate of the timepiece. So what we're really doing is putting a watch in a certain position on a microphone. And that microphone is connected to a small device that has a readout, and it will actually listen to those tick-tock noises in the watch and then feed back to us the daily rate. And when we're dealing with a wristwatch, we have daily rates in every position that we want to measure. That could be just dial up like a watch sitting on a desk. That rate will be different than dial down or crown up or crown down. When you have your watch on your wrist, it's always moving in different positions. So we try and time and average everything out so that it will keep time in an average to whatever accuracy standard we're trying to reach. So if that's 10 seconds a day on the positive side, you might have one position that's -1, but you might have another position that is +11. In order for a timing machine to give us an accurate representation of the health of a mechanical movement, we need to input something called the lift angle. Then it could be input into the machine, and the math will all be correct so that we can get the amplitude. Now, the amplitude of a wristwatch movement is simply the pendulum swinging back and forth and how far that pendulum is swinging. In a wristwatch, we have a balance wheel, and the balance wheel can swing back and forth, and with each oscillation, we want to be able to set the time it takes to oscillate exactly where we want it. The distance that the oscillator moves back and forth, measured in an angle, is your amplitude. So that's how far the wheel goes back and forth in degrees. That number directly shows you the health of the movement. Meaning, is there too much friction keeping that balance wheel from swinging as much as it's supposed to swing as freely as it should be? As a watch ages and requires service, the amplitude will drop. So it's a good indicator that a watch might be ready for service or could have some problem, maybe that could be fixed without a full service. But it's a good indicator that that movement needs some work. Now, it should still keep time, but that low amplitude might mean that parts are going to start wearing out because oils are dry. So for timing a watch, it's not absolutely necessary to know the lift angle in order to get an accurate representation of that amplitude. But it's very helpful. If you were purchasing a used watch and wanted to know when you might have to service it next, the amplitude is a good indicator of the health of that watch. When we time watches, we time everything in seconds per day. So when a watchmaker says +7, that means +7 seconds in one day. During watch repair or watch manufacturing, a watch will be tested many times in order to test the work, make sure everything was done properly, and to regulate the movement. Now, regulating the movement can only change the timing so much. So all the work leading up to regulating that movement needs to be done properly. At that point, we can make small adjustments in the timing. And those adjustments can be made with a timing machine. We can put the movement right on the timing machine and actually manipulate the hairspring of the watch and the balance wheel in order to perfect and do fine regulation on that timepiece. Once the movement is within the specified timing requirements, then it could be cased up, checked again, because as a movement is cased up, there are some additional forces at play when you clamp the movement into the case and when you tighten a case back. So there's always multiple checks to make sure nothing changed while the watch is being cased up. Now, positionally, timing will change. You have a coil spring called the hairspring, which will sag depending on which position the watch is in. Not only will that sag, but the balance wheel might have slightly heavier spots around the rim. And those heavier spots will change the timing of the watch depending on what position it's in. When you put a watch on a timing machine, you'll see a line, and that's the trace of the watch. And that line is simply showing the rate visually, and a line sloping up will mean that the rate is positive. A line sloping down will mean the rate is negative. The steepness of that line correlates with exactly how many seconds per day it's fast or how many seconds per day it's slow. If you have two lines instead of one line, that means you have a beat error. And a beat error means that the symmetry of the escapement with those 5 tick-tock noises that the microphone is listening for is slightly off. One side is taking slightly longer than the other side. On the beat error, having two separate lines is not ideal, but you might see that it happens in different positions. And that is not something that I would expect anyone to be able to fix if they're just doing a simple regulation on the watch. The beat error shouldn't go above 0.2. That's pretty standard in the industry to keep that below 0.2. If you see a beat error that's larger than 0.2, that would indicate that you might have a larger problem and you're going to need a little more fine regulation or possibly service. Another thing that we can do with a timing machine is actually check the amplitude drop when we use complications on a watch. Every time you have a complication added to a watch, it actually drains torque from the movement, meaning you could see an amplitude drop. If you have something like a chronograph, it could be really obvious. You might start a chronograph and your watch stops relatively soon after starting the chronograph. That means there was an amplitude drop, which means it's requiring too much power to run the chronograph, so the watch stops. You can see if the amplitude drops to a degree that is not enough to keep the movement running, or just outside of tolerance, outside of the manufacturer's spec. This allows you to pinpoint exactly where a problem is, right? You can find out that, oh, it is the chronograph, and I need to look at the chronograph parts. When we regulate a watch on a timing machine, depending on the type of watch, what we're doing is shortening or lengthening the effective length of the hairspring by moving a regulator, or in other watches where you have weights on the balance wheel, we are actually moving the weight in or out in order to change the moment of inertia of that balance wheel. Using those two techniques, we can fine tune the rate of a wristwatch. As I assemble a watch, I will check the timing after the movement is assembled completely. After timing just the movement itself, we could add complications, test it again. We can add the dial and hands, test it again, case it up, and test it again. All of the checks we do during the assembly process of a watch, we're doing those so that we know the health of the watch movement as it's being built up. That way, if we start to see a problem after we've cased a watch up, we know that something is wrong with the way that watch is being cased up. Maybe the dial isn't completely secure to the watch and it's pushing against the hands. Maybe it's a little too tight in the case and it's actually warping a bridge on the movement. These are things that could lead to much lower amplitudes and poor timing after the watch has been cased up. So that allows us to kind of backtrack a little bit and diagnose if we see a problem arise as we're assembling. And then, of course, if a watch is assembled and sits for a period of time, it should be checked again before going out to a customer. And that's pretty standard practice to make sure that before any watch goes out of the door, whether it's a serviced watch or a brand new watch, it should be checked before going to the customer. We have multiple ways of checking the timing, and right now we're just focusing on using the timing machine. The timing machine gives us an instant look at the rate and the health of the movement. The other way to check the timing is by actually letting a watch run, because if you have a tooth missing on a wheel or damaged on a wheel, that tooth might take half the day to go around and reach a point where it actually stops the watch. So if we're only looking at an instant rate on the timing machine, it might look perfect and ready to go. But if we don't let it sit and make sure that it can run through all the teeth on all the wheels and remain on time, not stopping, then we haven't actually made sure that it will keep time over the course of the full power reserve.